So, because Halloween 2020 was more or less canceled in my parts for obvious reasons, when early 2021 slowly drug itself out of bed, and there were signs that vaccines were definitely on the way, I thought things would be looking really good by October. While that isn't a totally untrue statement, let's just say that the proverbial hot girl Halloween certainly did not happen. Nonetheless, the idea for this costume started with the light up hoops, almost purely because LEDs at night are fun. That's literally it. I also jokingly thought that the hoops would provide some level of personal space, pun embarrassingly intended. And so the idea of a space-themed costume was born. The original plan was to make some sort of Jetsons-esque bubble helmet that would go with the atomic era inspired outfit, but then in late April, an unexpected birthday gift from my brother arrived on my doorstep, which turned out to be a 3D printer. At that point, I had exactly zero experience with 3D printing or designing, but after maybe a month of monkeying around and watching way too many 3D printing videos, I decided, let's get ridiculous. And that's how the idea for my absurd alien head helmet was hatched. The biggest sewing challenge was figuring out the sleeves. And this is where my big Rapunzel doll here comes in handy. I plan on sewing her a bodysuit so I can pin things to her easier, but having a small human-ish stand-in to work out the logic of a pattern is what makes her useful. Similarly, the stand-up collar also required me to work straight off of my dress form so I could trace the jacket neckline right on the actual body. And the rest of the sewing was pretty straightforward, including the very much expected interference from my stubborn roommate. The hoops were also pretty straightforward. I threaded an LED strip through 3 levels of HDPE tubing and then hid the exposed lights behind the straps of the cage skirt. Because the lights were working fine like this, I decided to leave well enough alone, but a future fix I'd like to implement is to install quick disconnect connectors between the strips in each hoop so it's possible to add and remove things from the tubing. The helmet was the major challenge of this project. Every part of this, from the designing to the actual assembly, was a process I had never attempted before. And that made every single part take considerably longer because I really, truly didn't know what I was doing. But hey, unless you're a brain surgeon, sometimes knowing what you're doing is highly overrated. Or at least that's what I tell myself. But also, because of this, I got the dimensions a little wrong in my first iteration. Okay, so my first attempt at starting to print out my file did not go as planned, which isn't surprising because it never does. All right. So this is a mouthful. I don't know. If I want to make this like super giant, huge, I guess it could work. Yeah, this isn't gonna work. And since I don't have a printer large enough to print a full-size helmet in one shot, I did have to print in pieces and glue them together. While I was careful to align the edges as much as possible, there were some edges that didn't quite align as flat as I wanted, and that resulted in problems smoothing those edges over. Next time, I think printing thicker walls might allow for more aggressive sanding that would potentially help that problem. Okay, so this is where we're at. I read somewhere one of the things to do to fill in the cracks is to use wood filler. And because some of the edges of this are not perfectly level, I assumed I could just sort of, you know, put it on and smooth it out and all be one kind of smooth surface. That turned out not to be so much the case. It's worked great in the actual cracks, but unfortunately there are a lot of spaces where when I tried to sand it, to get all kind of chunky and little bits would come out of it. And so I ended up basically having to sand off a significant amount of what I put on. So, moral of the story, you should really test your hypotheses before you actually do it on the real thing. But as usual, I was in a hurry and thought it would be fine. Anyways, we're getting there. Just don't be like me and use your wood filler sparingly. At a certain point, I had to just deal with what I had and tried priming and building up more layers, which wasn't particularly successful. And the paint job on top of that looked even worse. So I resorted to one last ditch of an idea. And I apologize to anyone watching this, but that last ditch was glitter. Many layers of glitter. If you've ever screwed up frosting a cake and then threw on a bunch of sprinkles to hide your crimes, well, same concept. And happily, it kind of worked. I'm not too mad about Glitter Alien. Because I wanted the eyes to bulge out, and I also don't have access to a vacuum former, my solution was to use plastic chocolate molds that happen to be in the shape of giant eggs. As you can see, they're not all equally clear enough to see out of, so I'm glad I ordered multiple kinds. After that, I just needed to cut them to the right size and dunk them in a pot of synthetic fabric dye. And voila, alien eyes. There's not much to say about the electronics other than to laugh at my extremely janky hot glued box I made to house the last minute push button activated sound module. The original plan was to have the sounds voice activated, but I ran out of time to do anything programming related. And because I'm not even close to being a programmer, that stuff tends to take me a little bit of time to figure out. The sounds themselves, I just quickly recorded myself speaking some gibberish that I then processed so they sounded a bit more alien and or robot-ish. I may play with that a little bit in the future. Final thoughts. The costume itself is probably the best thing I've designed and created so far. The jacket in particular actually looks like the sketches I made, which does not always happen. I think the only addition I'd make is to install belt loops on the skirt for the purpose of keeping the two waistbands together because the cage skirt kind of likes to slide around a little bit. Part of my original design also included a backpack, which was supposed to house all the batteries and electronics, so that might be something I add in the future. The helmet is technically not finished, so there's still more work to be done by next year. I may or may not add another layer or two of glitter to try to smooth it out a little more. And it definitely needs a hard top coat other than the Mod Podge that's on it right now. I also want to design some sort of neck piece to rest the helmet in so it's supported by my shoulders and also so that my neck is covered, because I'm not a rocket scientist, but I feel like if your neck is exposed in space, you're not gonna fare too well. And finally, the electronics for the helmet still need a lot of work. I've already mentioned that the push button idea was implemented purely because I ran out of time, and I at least wanted to showcase the basic idea of what I was going for. Sometime next year, I'll get back to working on improvements, and if I make any big changes, I'll make an update video about it. So this is probably not going to be the last of this particular project. In the meantime, I've got other projects to work on that I pushed aside because this took longer than expected, as it always does. So I hope everyone's Halloween was as enjoyable as possible. And here's hoping you have an equally enjoyable Forest Holiday cheer season in the upcoming weeks. Whee! Oh no, oh no. Whee! Ready? Ta-da! I do not act my age.